Wicked. Brrr. Here we are once again. How are you, brother?
Pretty good, man. Pretty
How do I
good.
pronounce your surname?
Depends whether you want to say it in a French way, a German way, or an Australian way.
What's the combination of all three?
I don't know. In Australia, they often say Bohler, but French, it's more like Bohler.
Bohler.
Yeah, I prefer more like that.
What's the German?
It's like Bohler.
Bohler.
Yeah.
And what is it from? Like, is it a combination of French, German?
Well, my father's French, and his father was from Alsace, which is on the French-German border. So obviously, at some point, there was German, and there was a bit of a migration across into France.
Sweet. So but you were born in Australia?
No, I was born in France, but I grew up in Australia.
All right. So you speak French? Is that your first language?
It was my first language, but we moved here when I was 2, and my dad stopped speaking French to me at home, which is a big mistake. If you got to second language, definitely speak it to the kids. So I lost it, and Australian became my language.
I'm a similar story. Like Jamaican patois was my first language. Then I learned Māori. I learned Māori as my second language. Like moved to New Zealand, and then I learned Australian. And people often will ask me, "Are you from England? Are you from America?" It's like, because it's just a worldwide thing. Like, really? I'm like, I think I sound Australian as fuck.
Do you still speak those languages?
Aussie as, mate. If I'm with family, I was just in Jamaica and speak mostly patois, but I don't know any Māori, but I do find that languages are easy to pick up and accents are easy for me to emulate, and like people are always surprised that, like, oh, that's really good pronunciation, with whatever it might be. But it's good, man. Yeah. So your evolution, authenticity, relating, curiosity, culture, syntropy, all of those things that you mentioned. Yeah. Which one's fascinating you the most currently?
I don't know. They all kind of co-arise. It depends on any given moment. At the moment, I guess I'm pretty focused on like embodiment and how that plays out in terms of relationships at the moment, with my colleagues.
Hence the Alanis Morissette thing.
Totally.
That we were discussing off air earlier.
Yeah. Well, and also with my colleagues, we've launched our first program, which is starting next week, which is like a 5-week kind of training course. It's a live training course. And so it's very much around the embodiment of boundaries and relational, and how we, construct more authentic, vulnerable relationships that can navigate conflict and go into like places that I call high level play.
Give us a little background on that for those who have no idea who your colleagues are and what you do.
So my colleagues and I, Carly and Prem is their names. We have a venture called TRIIBE with 2 I's, TRIIBE, tribe.earth. And so we have a desire to shift culture. That's our ultimate aim at this moment of like, okay, we're in a place where paradigmatically our species kind of needs to go into the next phase. It's happening anyway. And so it's like, this is something that's happening. I feel like the evolutionary impulse is guiding us. Okay, I want to have a voice in that. And so that's where we've come from, desiring to have a voice in how that shifts and assist in that shifting. And we're focused in at this particular point on relationship, on actually how do we, and not just romantic relationship, how do we navigate all forms of relationship through the art of relating. So the actual action, like the noun of a relationship, the structure of a relationship is formed by how we relate with each other. So that's what we're diving into, is like understanding the mechanics of our communication, of how we relate together, and the type of relationship that's then formed from that, and desiring more naked, more kind of honest, transparent, open, but like with solid boundaries, so all of that kind of stuff, moving a self-authored kind of way of being, secure attachment. So we're also not operating from anxious, avoidant kind of wounding.
Talk us through a little bit of that, because it's something that has been coming up quite a bit. I've talked to a few people talking about these different attachment styles and things like this. So for those who have no idea, can you elaborate upon that for a little?
Attachment theory seems to be pretty hot at the moment,
Right.
which makes sense, because I feel like the thing to go, how do we do something different? So attachment theory is pretty complex from my understanding.
Can you just rewind there for a sec? We just had a pause. So
Oh, yeah.
attachment theory is pretty hot, and then go again.
So attachment theories, like, and I think the reason why it's so popular right now, attachment theory is kind of like hot and trending, is that the pain of being an insecure attachment is becoming so loud that we want to do something different. You know, we actually want to have a different experience in our relationships with each other. We're so over kind of these dysfunctional ways of relating with each other, you know, especially with people that we love and care about. So attachment theory, it's like, it's a complex kind of thing, and there's like multiple different theories and multiple different approaches of it, but stripped down to the basics, and it depends on whose work you're looking at, but stripped down to the basics, kind of the classic on it is a book called Attached by, I think it's Amir Levine or something like that, and he basically breaks down attachment into 3 different categories. There's anxious attached, there's avoidant attached, and there's secure attached. It's more complex than that. Essentially, anxious attached, the childhood wound is being abandoned, the experience of being abandoned as a child. And so we've got like anxiety whenever we feel like we're going to be abandoned by somebody, by essentially the moment we come into a relationship with someone and they become our, you know, like our primary source of love. If they start to move away from me, I'm going to go into anxiety, and I'm going to start reaching for them in kind of like this clingy, you know, we call this neediness a lot of the time. I'm going to be like, because my system goes into anxiety because I actually believes I'm about to be abandoned. The avoidant attached tended to be enmeshed as a child. Like, you know, maybe they had a parent who smothered them, gave them too much attention, didn't actually give them any space. And so they experience love as overwhelming. And so they tend to like get shut down. Like when too much vulnerability and too much love, the desire is to move away from it. It's often quite a numbing experience. Like, I want to just numb that out and get away from it. I just, you know, and that the avoidant people are the people who will disappear for like 2-3 days and not say anything, you know, and then come back as if everything's fine, while the anxious person is going out of their mind, sending text after text after text, you know, and ringing and not getting any response and like freaking out. And so a secure attachment is a place of basically not being in anxiety and not being avoidant. It's a place of sovereignty. So one of the things that, yeah.
Is there moments where, or cases where you'll have both or all of the above or neither?
Yeah, I think it's largely context dependent, and something I've understood, like this book says you're either anxious or you're avoidant, or you're anxious avoidant. What I've come to understand through other work, like looking at codependence models, is that if you're one, you're the other. You know, if you're anxiously attached, and the way I've been thinking about it is, if it's you're either insecurely attached or securely attached. And it may be context dependent. I'm securely attached with some people, but some people I'll actually get triggered into insecure attachment. And so the way I think about it is, anxious attached is I want what I can't have. And avoidant attachment is I don't want what I can have. So if I'm in a place where like something's too easy, it's available to me, and I'm avoidant attached, I don't want it. It's too available. I want the things that I can't have, you know, and that's the anxious part of it. You know, I actually want what I can't have.
Right. And I notice this with myself and with a lot of, you know, working in coaching industry, in a space where I'm facilitating change, being change agent, if you will, that we can know the thing, we can know the theory, we can know the concept, but then it's like, well, why do I keep doing why do I keep doing the thing that I know how it works? So imagine the enlightenment is like, one, all right, cool, this is enlightening stuff, this is powerful stuff, but now how do I apply it so it actually sticks as well?
Yeah, totally. Like, you know, and I'm the same. Like, I'm in the process of kind of healing my attachment wounds. And so what I've been understanding around attachment is the way that I start to heal that is I start to model secure attachment to myself. This is what's the idea of reparenting. I start to, when I'm anxious, I soothe myself. I find ways to actually soothe myself and to come out of anxiety. And if I'm avoidant, if I'm noticing, if I catch myself in avoidance, I actually then express where I am to the other. Hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. I'll get back to you tomorrow. I actually make it very explicit and clear where I'm at, that I'm not just completely disappeared. So as I start modeling those behaviors to myself, I actually start kind of reparenting. I become my own parent. I become sovereign. And this overlays a lot into boundary work, like having really good boundaries, so that I'm actually well differentiated from another person. I'm sovereign, you're sovereign, and now we can have a relationship as two sovereign beings. If I'm insecurely attached, I'll fall, like we get enmeshed with each other. It's too much, I got to avoid it. Yeah.
Well, it's narcissism at its finest, isn't it? There's no separation between yourself and the other.
Yeah, totally.
So with that reparenting, that's a whole movement, isn't it? I've seen like there's lots of people doing this kind of reparenting work. I've talked to a few other people on the podcast who are heavily involved in this work as well. What are some of how did you find out about the work, the reparenting, this concept itself, and what's most exciting you about the whole movement?
So, I mean, I've kind of like come at it, like the term itself, reparenting, is fairly new to me. But that's come through Pia Melody's work on codependence. That idea has come to me. Yet the concept of it, I think, has been in my experience for quite a long time. I've been trying to like learn how to reparent myself for whatever, like 17 years or something. From the first time I realized I was fucked up, I was like, hey, I don't want to be fucked up. And it's been a journey of like, gradually becoming less and less fucked up, less and less triggered and taken out of alignment, and being able to be more and more sovereign, and there's still maybe forever pieces to work with, while I'm a separate self. And like what excites me around it is what's possible if we come into securely attached relationship. What's possible culturally when we kind of end this painful dance of relationship that we're in, and we actually start to create healthy relationships that are differentiated but co-creative. So it's like, if I'm well differentiated and you're well differentiated, and then we actually come together, we can now actually co-create from a place of mutual sovereignty. Whereas if we're enmeshed, we actually just create drama mostly.
Can you give us some examples of, like, I guess, success stories or case studies, whether it's yourself or the people you've worked with, that like you have one situation or scenario which is the enmeshed, the drama, the non-productive, non-beneficial way, and then like what the reparenting process, and then what the new scenario will look like once it's in a healthier paradigm?
Right. So I'm just mindful of like my colleagues. And so both my colleagues, they're in a relationship with each other. And so we're very much in the work as we're learning to transmit it. So we're kind of like discovering it as we're articulating it. And so we've been using their relationship as kind of an experiment to like discover ways of working with it. So we've been using a lot of constellation style work. So there'll be a way where one of them kind of like will be more anxious and reaching for the other one, who becomes more avoidant, turns away. So we might actually break that down. We might actually, when the pattern's up, or we might actually recreate it and then have them embody certain postures that demonstrate what's happening on the inside. So they'll come into the embodied posture.
To the embodiment, it's like a visual representation of a non-physical experience.
Yeah. So for example, like if I'm anxious and reaching, I might be kind of collapsed and so I'm going to take that on, and the avoidant person may be like taking on, turned away and kind of like hiding themselves, and so we'll go into those postures and we'll really amplify them and like feel the feelings. And so this is a process, a developmental process, moving from subjective awareness into objective awareness. So my subjective awareness is what I think to be me. I'm experiencing this is who I am. This reactive pattern is who I am. But when I'm able to look at it, I'm able to start like peeling it away and looking at it as a thing that I do rather than who I am. It becomes an object. And as it becomes an object, it no longer has power over me. So we go into these postures and we start really looking at them. And then we actually gradually, bit by bit, come into kind of an unfolding and into a different embodiment. And that kind of like rewires the nervous system to have new choices. So next time that situation comes up, it might not be immediate, but next time it comes up, I'll be able to see like, oh, my internal posture is doing this thing that I'm used to doing when I get anxious. I'll catch it because I've really, amplified it. I'll go, oh, this thing is happening. Oh, I actually have another opportunity. I have an opportunity to do something different. And then
that's the pattern interrupt.
Pattern interrupt. Like, oh, I can do something different here. Try it out. And it might be, the first time it might be like, I catch it after the fact. The whole thing's gone through and then I go, oh, I could have done that thing, but I didn't do it. Now I make amends. And the next time it's like halfway through. I'll catch it halfway through and I go, oh, interrupt. And the next time I'll like catch it right at the beginning. And then the next time I'll catch it before it even starts. I'll be like, oh, here's that thing.
Right. And would you suggest like breaking it down in parts? Like for you, I guess it's different with different styles of people, I imagine. But like for me, I imagine it would be like good for me. All right, focus on just the one thing, getting really good at that, and then moving on to the next rather than kind of being aware of it all and doing little pieces or.
Yeah, totally. Looking at one pattern at a time, rather than trying to like, there's so much complexity happening in us. We just got to like catch them enough. I'm sure you're the same. And I don't know most of the patterns that I run until I know them. If I don't know them, means I don't know them.
Yeah. Don't know you don't know. That's why I find it's really helpful having brutal honesty and feedback from people outside of you people you trust and respect, and peers and coaches and family and whatnot. But I find that there's I would say like just in looking around, like a lack of that brutal honesty, like people willing to go, actually, this is what I see. Let's have a tough conversation that might bring tears and whatnot and be triggering. And there's not heaps of people willing to do that, to step into the space where you can just be brutally honest. And I don't know for you, have you found that, because sometimes it is like, if I look at my direct circles of influence and friend groups and peer groups, I'm surrounded by amazing people, surrounded by really people who I respect, admire, and yet still it's not prevalent. It's not this kind of brutal honesty isn't a norm really. Is where it's just like, hey, this is what's up. Quit bullshitting yourself, or quit the self-deception, or this is an honest feedback. It could be triggering, probably will be, but here it is anyway. It's come from love. You know what I mean? So if that's in my group, which is full of amazing people, imagine the next group, which is, I don't know, like obviously everyone's amazing in their own right, but
yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it's because it's vulnerable for me to share like, a projection, because essentially if I'm sharing something around you that I think is dysfunctional, it's a projection, which means that there's probably some truth. But it's also vulnerable to reveal that to another person, because I could be scared of like, are you going to like me after? Like, I might share this thing with you and you'll turn around and bite my head off, and that's it. I could mess up our relationship. And I feel the same. I think that there's like, we need this if we're, in order to really grow and excel. And often that's why we reach coaching. I reach out for a therapeutic or a growth contained context in which someone, will do that for me, and I put them in that position. But also I have the same desire to have that with my peers. So a big part of what we're creating in our thing is we want to create, so part of our course sets out a foundation for a practice. So we actually have a relational practice, so that we come into a practice container that's timed. And in that practice container, we know that that's what's going to occur. So these things are able to arise inside of the practice container. And because we're in the practice container, we're willing to work with them. So in these,
you mentioned it's like a play space as well. It's play, it's fun, it's discovery. It's like, we're curious. It's that those are some of the mindsets that you're coming to it with, right?
Totally. So like this term that I'm coining called high level play. And to me, high level play is play that includes emotions, includes processing, it includes kind of ideology and exploration, includes all of these things. And
So you got just cut out, it includes processing. What did you say after that?
You know, mental processing, kind of meta level, you know, inquiry and cognitive skills, you know, the stuff that sometimes people say you're too much in your head, you know, but us geeks love talking about anyway. So it includes all of this stuff, and levity and play and joy. And so when we're actually including all of these things, then the play space we enter into can go anywhere. So in any given moment, we could be playing and laughing, and I might, you know, in those places, like I like to poke, you know, with my friends who I have this kind of relationship built up. I might poke at aspects of them that I know they're working on, and I'll poke at them in a playful way, and we'll often laugh really hard about it. But we're kind of like doing deep processing work in a play environment, so it's fun. And we know that if we're playing and someone gets triggered, we have the capacity to deal with that. So the more capacity we have to do all of these things, the more option we have to play in.
Are there particular agreements, or like, I imagine there's a level of permission you have to, like, if I'm hanging out with mates, I can take the piss out of them, and they're going to laugh, or they might be a little bit butthurt and upset, but they know that I love them. And you know what I mean? Yeah. There's these unspoken permissions and unspoken agreements that are there. Are there some, like, I guess, agreement frames or something that you have in place in these spaces that are conducive to this kind of, I guess it's transformational play?
I've been in inquiry around the idea of agreements for a long time. So I've played with, especially early on in my facilitation, explicit agreements. And then later I stopped using explicit agreements because, like, I want practice to resemble real life as closely as possible. So, you know, in real life outside of practice, I don't necessarily have these agreements set for me. And the truth is, even if we agreed to those agreements, you could still break them anyway. It actually doesn't mean anything. Like, if you're a person who doesn't have very strong integrity, in verbally agreeing to something doesn't matter. So I would say the thing that allows that creates the kind of like high level play, the conduciveness for us, is the level of capacity to practice that people have developed. So it's actually more of a skill and capacity development than it is like
so it's a willingness as well. But are there some presuppositions that are a frame that you're playing in that allow the work to work?
What do you mean by presuppositions?
So is it like I'm presupposing that this person is going to play, or I'm presupposing this person isn't going to take offense to what I'm saying, or, you know, things like this.
So rather than do that, like, so the practice space that we have is built up over a series of weeks. So we actually develop the capacity and the skill first before we even really enter that space. So
So you shut up in the tool first.
That's right. And so that's when we enter the space, we kind of understand that that's what we're stepping into. There's kind of an implicit, it's somewhat explicit as well, around that we're entering into a space where anything may arise, and you're actually responsible for yourself. You actually have self-responsibility like you do in the world. And we're wanting to promote a culture of self-authorship where we're not so dependent on our outside relationships to inform who we are. We're actually self-sourced, self-governed. You know, we're autonomous, kind of psychologically sovereign beings with each other. And so we're practicing how do we be that with each other, and then catching the places where we're not, and then pointing at them, creating object of them, having new choice, having even.
So if I'm just trying to get at, like, if a listener's listening to this and I want to play at home, what's a simple kind of way that they could recreate some of these concepts, you know, without having to do the workshop or do the work or learn the course or whatever?
Yeah. So there's a few things that I would play with. I would play with how well am I listening? So I've been defining listening as like the embodiment of listening through kind of different postures of listening. So am I listening with presence? So am I actually, like, in my body present to you? That's kind of the first layer of listening. Second layer of listening is, am I accepting? Am I actually accepting that how you feel or what you experience is fine? It's valid. You know, I might not necessarily agree with it. I might not necessarily condone it. But if I'm in acceptance, I'm not going to, like, and you're having an emotional experience, I'm not going to need to reach over there and fix you or console you or do something in order for me to feel better. You know, because that's often when we try and reach out, instinctively reach out to try and fix or, you know, manipulate someone's emotional experience, we're actually doing it because I want to feel better. Their feelings making me uncomfortable. You know, so we're in acceptance of someone else's experience. This is for listening. And then am I in non-judgment? So am I actually able to receive that whatever you say is about you? It's not about me. So I don't need to judge you about that. And then do I have spaciousness? So do I have space for you to show up fully? So that's kind of like, how well am I listening? And then from that place, can I be really curious about who you are? You know, the same way that you're kind of interviewing me with curiosity, kind of like following what's interesting for you allows me to respond to it. And then we can have kind of this like exploratory experience together.
So it's like a five part of listening. Is that what you've just?
Well, the 4 parts, curiosity kind of emerges through all of that. Yeah. So curiosity is kind of a different trajectory, and that's one of the models. It's more the embodiment of listening. And so that's like a way of like, okay, I can practice my listening skills and then need to practice curiosity. My experience in the world is people aren't very curious, to be honest. People aren't curious, you know.
It kind of does set you apart, doesn't it?
Huh?
It kind of does set you apart. Like I found that most people who are curious ask a lot of questions, but it's interesting because I look at children and I look at myself as a child. I look at most children, all of us are fucking curious. Like it gets beaten out of us somewhere along the way.
Totally. You know, and I think like one way I like to think about the human animal is that, you know, all animals have some kind of instinctive capacity. Like a spider is born knowing that it needs to build webs, and it knows how to build the webs. Nothing has to teach it. We're taught to be curious and to learn. That's our instinct. Our instinct from birth is to be curious and to learn. That we're learning machines, curious machines. You know, that's our animal nature. So yeah, so curiosity is a big thing, you know, and it's like just to start being, you know, a lot of the time I'm just waiting for you to finish talking so I can start talking. You know, a lot of I call it ping pong conversations. You know, I'm just waiting for you to finish hitting the ball, and then I'll just hit it right back, and we don't go anywhere. Yeah. So curiosity is a great way for people to start playing. Yeah, exactly. And then the other part I would say to play at home is to start leaning into revealing more about what's going on inside. How do I actually feel? What do I actually want? What's the meaning I make up about stuff? When you say something, I'm making something up about whatever you say. I'm making something up about who you are and what that means to me. To start revealing that, you know, start revealing the sensations that occur in my body as they occur. So these are kind of places we can start to play in this.
And doesn't matter if I'm playing, like, can I just go on, I don't know, can I start playing with people I've just met? Can I start bringing in these concepts with family and friends or people I feel safe with, a partner, or doesn't really matter, or go to a party and do it, go to a festival, go to a whatever, and just randomly start playing this types of stuff kind of for your own benefit more so, or just to bring people into it?
Totally. As I was learning all of this stuff like years ago, I practiced my curiosity. I actually practiced my curiosity so much. And I would just go out there and I would meet people and I would just get to know them. I would like really get to know them. And I got really sharp at it, you know, that I could like, people would share stuff about themselves, and they do it now without even me asking a lot of the time. I think the way I just show up is like that. You're laughing. Maybe you have a similar experience.
Exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if like, and I just practice it, and it gave me a richer experience of life. One of the frames I love about this is like every single being really is an entire universe. You're an entire universe of which could never find the ends of. I could explore you forever. I mean, I don't know the ends of me. I'm sure you don't know the ends of you.
Well, they seem to be fractals every time it's like, so it's, you can dive deep in some areas and then, well, that's actually what I love about actually interacting with things, with beings in particular, is the idea of, there's this concept that came through one of my best friends. He is no longer with us, but he was able to articulate like if you think of narrow-mindedness and you think of it like it's a narrowness, there's this kind of, for those who are listening, it's like if you imagine a cylinder. So it's like cylindrical thinkers who think in cylinders, and it's like the cylinders that go, if you look here, you can only really see one way. And it's
like a pair of binoculars or something.
For a pair of binoculars or like a telescope or whatever, just a cylinder of thinking. It's like, if it doesn't fit in this, and you can expand your cylinder by learning new things, and you can become really knowledgeable and understand a lot in your cylinder, but you can still be narrow-minded because anything outside of that cylinder doesn't make sense, or you won't accept it, like you mentioned earlier about acceptance. And then there's kind of the thinkers who are more of a spherical thinking. And this spherical thinking is like, we're total spherical thinkers because we traverse these fractals that are going in all directions, in infinite directions. And you might get to the end of one of these fractals, and by having a discussion, having a curiosity, having an experience, you traverse down and you're like, fuck, I can't get any further down this is the end. But when you come back to like the center of this sphere, or just looking at it from a different perspective, that because you've traveled down there, it's opened up another part of the sphere, and your sphere has grown to include. And I feel that this is almost that being curious has that effect, and your field actually grows, and you don't need to ask the question anymore because you are the beingness of whatever it is you've cultivated.
Totally. And I also love, like, in that spherical thinking, the connecting as well. Like, I love linking things. Like, we might go down this way, but to me it links to something down here, you know, it links to something quite far opposite, and I'm like, oh wow, that actually connects from there to there. And it's like, it's almost like a shortcut. You can go through a wormhole here and pop out over here. You know, we're in that territory, but we've gone from that direction. It's
super cool fight. It reminds me of the Neo in the train when he's running to the screen and he comes back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. How does this relate to, just to stick on the kind of boundaries, the relating, these spaces of exploration. So we talk like, I actually this morning, somebody sent me something around Bill Cosby. He's like, hashtag me too, hashtag whatever the hashtag is, time's up, time not now. I can't remember the ones, but whatever the deal is with this like lack of boundaries and this boundary setting, it's become a new language, it's become a new movement. And how does this work relate to exactly that? Because some of the stuff you were talking about in terms of acceptance and ability to receive, I think you're mentioning, but it reminds you a lot of Betty Martin, I think it is. Is it the
Will of Consent?
Will of Consent, like that work. I guess what I'm asking is, just a bit of what your experience has been, what your thoughts are on these types of these movements, but also how the work you're doing links in with it.
So something that I've been doing as I dive into boundary work is that a boundary is a system. I have a boundary system. If I ever like have a boundary that's fixed, like I'm always going to respond this way because that's my boundary, that's not a boundary, that's a wall. A boundary by its nature, in terms of the way I think, is it's a flexible system. It moderates kind of the proximity I have from different relationships in the world. It kind of has a permeable nature to it. So I'm able to let some things in and keep some things out. You're kind of frozen. Uh-oh. What happened?
So it kicked me out.
Oh, right.
There's
it's okay.
Two of me. All good. Still recording though. So it's the proximity.
Okay. So yeah, boundaries can moderate proximity, distance I have. There's also a permeability. So what I want to let in and what I want to filter out. So like if I have good boundaries, I'm able to filter meaning making out. So I'm able to understand that what you think, feel, say, and do says more about you than it does about me. So I can filter that out. You know, so these postures that I was telling you about, these internal embodiment postures, kind of relate to the boundary system. And so essentially my boundary system keeps me sovereign. It keeps me as a sovereign being. And it's expressed more often than not verbally. We can do it non-verbally as well, but a lot of the time the way we express our boundaries is verbally, and they're responsive. It's context dependent. My boundary is always responding to the moment. What is okay and not okay? What do I want to let in? How close do I want to let someone, moment by moment by moment? And so it's like learning what that is and learning how to have that responsiveness and learning how to see where the holes are. And I feel like, to loop it all the way back to kind of the attachment stuff, if I'm anxious or avoidant attachment, anxious attachment is actually where I have holes in my boundary. So I'm hooked. I'm hooked by other people into anxiety. I actually don't have the sovereignty there. My boundary has gaps in it. If I'm avoidant attachment, I have a wall instead of a boundary. It's not something that's flexible. It's just like the wall goes. So it's like our boundary system allows us to be sovereign and then allows us to have a deeper, more authentic, naked relationship. Because if I've got me and I know how to get me and I know how to hold myself, I can reveal more and more of myself because I become less and less dependent on you for my psychological well-being.
And what's the relationship between, like, what was just coming up while you were speaking just then was so many things. my brain is like often just going.
I love that. Yeah, I totally understand that.
So in terms of what was like really prevalent in what was coming up was this idea of yes and no. So saying like, and then you mentioned it, you said what I'm okay with or not okay with. So to me, that's almost like a yes or a no. Or we hear about like a full body fuck yes, or like if it's a full, for me, it's something I've recently been really abiding by in myself. It's kind of a non-flexible boundary, if you're within myself. I'm like, if it's not fuck yes, it's a fuck no. And that's like, in terms of, I'm kind of looking for a place at the moment, because my place is going to be sold. And I'm like, if the place comes and I'm like, yeah, it will be nice, then it's a no. You know, it's if it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't tick the boxes, and it's a no. And so that's like a yes and no. It's like similar boundary style. Like, what's the relationship, I guess, between boundaries and yeses and nos? Because how I feel about it is, when we say no, then that is like a way to practice boundary, like boundary setting. This is a no. It's like, all right, cool, I'm reinforcing a boundary, or I'm building one where there never was one. And when I do say no, I'm actually saying yes to something else that is the actual thing I want. And when I say yes, for me, that's like, all right, cool, now I'm either flexible, extending that boundary to include something and to say yes to a thing. And for me, that's less about boundaries, I guess, if I say yes, or maybe it is. So I'm just trying to explore these ideas that are coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yeses and nos are like the extreme ends of boundaries. That's the end of the boundary. The yes is when I open my boundary to allow something to expand, to encompass something, or to allow something to come into me. So it might actually be that I extend out to include something, like you said. It might also be that I open my boundary to allow something in to touch me, you know. And the no is, no, I don't want that to come into me. No, I don't want to include that in my experience. And I'd say like they're kind of the extreme ends of the boundaries, and everything else between that is a negotiation. And so this is when I become, the more sensitive I come to my boundary system, and I can moderate, you know, and regulate what the information is, and track all the information, I can negotiate until I find the yes or the no. So so the gray space becomes negotiation rather than just blanket no. Like, maybe it's not that, but maybe this, you know. And this is where the curiosity comes in as well, and the co-creative piece. If we're both doing that, now we can find our yes. You know, we can navigate to find our collective yes.
And it's like, I think it was Felipe. I don't know if you know Felipe Lewis. He had him on the podcast a while back, and I think he wrote an article, I think it was, or he runs a workshop maybe as well. It's called the 50 Shades of Yes.
Nice.
And it's just like that, on the spectrum, you know, it's like there's different realms of yes. There's not yet, there's maybe, there's possibly, there's kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If this condition, then yes. If not, then no.
So like creating spaces and where we can explore our yeses and nos. I can see the benefit in that 100%.
Totally.
Yeah. So that's essentially what you're doing with your work, and other stuff as well?
Yeah, I'd say exploring, you know, I'd say the outcomes of the work that we're doing right now in you know, in our foundations course. So it's called a foundations course because we want to lay out the foundations for a collective practice. And then from there, we want to play into deeper and deeper spaces. We have a course that we're going to look at doing sometime next year. I'd like to do it over the winter solstice in the darkest time of the year up in the mountains, you know, where it's dark and cold and there's fire, and do a shadow work course. But from a place where it's collectively sourced. It's not so much someone telling everyone to do the process. We're all in the process and we know how to dance that process. So the foundations like kind of sets us up with the tools to do all this other exploratory work together. And the other course we're working with is an essence course where we kind of like show up more fully as ourselves. We clean up with the shadow and we show up with the essence.
Beautiful. Is this age appropriate? Is it like anyone can do this? 4-year-olds can do this, or?
Well, I don't know if I would use 4-year-olds. I'd probably say adults for the work that we're doing. It's adult work, but I would say learning these kind of skills and tools is super valuable as a parent.
Yeah.
And more often than not, especially at like a 4-year-old level, it's modeling. Kids do what we do, not what we say. They model our behavior. If I tell them to do one thing, but I have shit behavior, I guarantee you the kid's going to do what I did. They're not going to do what I told them to do. So it's like, if we model these kind of ways of being, our kids will naturally they won't need to be taught, you know, they'll know.
Cool, man. And what else is exciting you going forward? Just in terms of like, I don't know if you're any of a futurist at all, but what do you see coming forth in the coming times? What are you excited about?
So I have I've also got a background in permaculture, and
syntropic agroforestry and this type of stuff, or?
Yeah, you know, and it's like I don't have a super deep background. It was more like I have a couple of years of practical experience, but I'm not a born, you know, second generation farmer or whatever. Like the people who are really brilliant in these places are usually second or third or fourth generation farmers, you know, that have then opened their mind up to new concepts. And they like syntropic agroforestry. Ernst Scotch in Brazil, I think he's a third or fourth generation farmer, and he's like amazing. The work that he's doing is incredible. You know, and I think I'm excited about that. That's one other thing that I'm developing is I want to do a suburban syntropic gardening.
Tell us a little about what you know of what you know, just real quick.
About syntropic?
Syntropy, yes, and the permaculture for those. I know the term is thrown around, but like, what is it?
So to me, permaculture is it's the way I define it, and lots of people define it different ways. But through my own understanding, I've come to define it as it's a design science to create basically sustainable, thriving, human-centered ecosystems. So we're designing our own habitation as humans, and we're designing it with ecological principles. We're understanding the relationship of the sun to heating our house, to where gardens should be situated, to how we harness and use water, and how we passively heat and cool places, and where we place things in relation to the efficiency, you know, of needs that we have around them. So permaculture to me is like an overarching design framework. It doesn't necessarily have all the specific tool sets. It takes from a lot of categories and kind of like looks at how does it all combine together to create human settlement, you know? And at this stage in the game, it's largely applied to people in their own farms or their own houses. But I would love if this kind of knowledge is the way we start to collectively as a species take care of our human settlement. You know, if we design our human settlements, our cities around ecological principles, we can still live in the same kind of density that we do now, and we can still have the same kind of life, but we can reduce, you know, or even actually harmonize with the world to create a beneficial impact rather than, you know, environmental devastation. And that's where I get really excited about syntropy. So syntropic gardening or agroforestry is a particular application of farming, of agriculture, that understands ecological principles and works with principles that apply in nature to actually kind of, through understanding these principles, we can accelerate what would happen on its own in nature. We can actually create forests faster than nature would do without human intervention, so that we can actually become a positive intervention in the environment rather than a detrimental one, rather than kind of a liability to the environment. So we can actually create, like, from that perspective, as we start kind of diving in, and like, I have a belief that if we're going to continue going forward, all our agriculture has to convert over to things like syntropic agroforestry. And it is in Brazil, And it will happen because conventional agriculture is failing. Like, it's failing. It doesn't work. The farmers in Australia, there's suicide out there because their farms fail and they can't make any money and they kill themselves. Like, this has happened in India. This has happened in Southeast Asia. This is now happening in Australia, where farmers are like putting themselves out because they don't know what to do. And university doesn't have any answers for them.
And what's the application with the urban? So like, I know a lot of, you know, like I said, surrounded by some people who are like, yeah, they're doing some reasonable things. Obviously, a lot of us are still on grid here in the cities, you know, and there's only so much you can do when you're living in these environments. But yeah, I know for myself, it's like composting, or it's like, you know, it's reusing, it's recycling, these basic things. Yeah, what's some of the application of it, whether it's entropy or permaculture, just in, if whoever's listening, I imagine lots of listeners are coming from cities, you know?
So those are great things to do. There's like little things that we can do like that. Largely, so I'm gonna answer that question, but I want to back up a step in order to answer that. So part of the reason why I'm so invested in the tribe thing and teaching the relational stuff and influencing culture is that I believe the structure of society, so that's how we generate our power and how we build our houses and how we construct our cities and how we produce our food is society. You know, how we do our economics and politics is all societal structure. That's driven by culture, and culture is driven by individuals. So we do our personal development work at the individual level. And then where I'm passionate with the tribe stuff is then how do we take our personal development and bring it into our relationships such that we consciously create our own culture? And as we consciously create culture, we will shift the paradigm that will rearrange social structures. So to me, part of it is do your work, become a better human being, you know, bring that into relationship in your culture, create cultures around sharing and gift exchange and gift economy. And then and then for people who are, you know, in law or they're in urban design or urban planning, learn about this stuff and stay in your profession. Not everyone has to go off and be a healer or a coach. Like, we need really awesome politicians and lawyers and like CEOs and engineers and mechanics. Yeah, we need all of this stuff. Like, and you know, farmers and like plumbers and electricians. We need people who understand.
Teachers,
you know.
And it's, I love that conscious co-creation of culture. It's very illiterate, but it's like conscious co-creation of consciousness came through as you were saying that as well. It's just like it's there. It's like consciously curating your own consciousness, the consciousness that we're all experiencing. And one of the,
I just want to pause on that. One of the like philosophies I love is integral theory by Ken Wilber. And something that he says is like the later stages of development, the developmental paradigm we're moving into, it's not formed yet. We're actually forming it by the way we interact and think right now. So what, you know, that's just an affirmation for what you said of, you know, consciously co-creating consciousness. You know, we're creating our consciousness by how we relate to it.
100%. And what's the difference between, I guess, like an eco city and I guess like, yeah, I know that there's some eco cities, like Adelaide's been called an eco city, or with some ecologically built and so on and so forth, neo-urbanism, this type of stuff. I guess, yeah, because there's some, like you said, it's going to happen regardless. Where can people begin to start finding out who want to do more, you know, who want to do more, you know, wherever they are and want to be about that life more? You know, if I'm coming through.
Yeah, it was a little bit choppy, but I got your question. So permaculture is a good start. I feel like a lot of the permaculture out there is a little bit outdated though. You know, and so for anyone who is into permaculture, I highly encourage you to kind of revolutionize the way you teach it and bring the personal development and the cultural stuff into that, bring the transformation into that, which is what I've been trying to work on. Syntropic farming, look up the YouTube video Life in Syntropy for anyone listening who really wants to like you'll be blown away by that video. And if we imagine all our food production switching over to these systems, it's like we'll live on paradise. You know, we'll live in utopia. We already do, but it'll be like next level. I'm desiring on creating courses around how do we apply that to suburban and urban areas. Like, how do I actually grow enough food at my house to feed me? So like one of the farmers I know who's adopted syntropic principles and is doing it up north, who, when I was teaching courses up north, I'm no longer teaching those courses. I'd take my students to go and visit him. And one of the things, like, he was growing vegetables in a syntropic system. So it's growing vegetables in a tree system as well. So you're getting yields stacked over time. That's like, it's a really complex agriculture system. We stack in space and time. So we actually stack yields. So we harvest from 30 days, which is rocket, which comes out first, all the way up to 80 years, which will be timber, and everything's planted at the same time. So we actually intelligently plan a long-term succession, and a forest is created as we're harvesting.
Yeah.
So he's doing this kind of farming, and he's like pissed off that he has to grow vegetables. He's like, vegetables are easy. Everyone should grow their own vegetables. You know, let's take care of the bigger stuff like grains, fruits, timber, that kind of stuff, pulses, nuts. Like, that's the kind of stuff we should be putting into agroforestry, you know, and for the meat eaters out there, cattle and poultry and those kind of systems in these more forest-based systems. And we can take care of our own vegetables, you know, because vegetables on a commercial scale is back-breaking labor. Like, even organic vegetable gardening, it's like, no, you don't want to do that. That's like 6 to 8 hours bent over picking little lettuces off the ground. It's horrible. Yeah. But to feed one person, you know, like, to set up a system, it might take, you know, a couple of weeks to, you know, it might take like 10 hours or something like that to set up a few meters squared of a system. And then it's like 1 hour a week of work, and we could pretty much feed ourselves if we know what we're doing. Yeah. So I'm really excited about trying to apply that to suburban areas so we can actually grow real food rather than kind of like hobby gardening. Like, a lot of people growing food at home, it's like hobby gardening. It's like cherry tomatoes and a few lettuces. And it's like, cherry tomatoes are a weed. They'll grow anywhere. You know, and I don't say that like to be mean, but it's like, we got to get serious about this. Like,
you got to actually sustain yourself and imagine that it's like, well, reimagine what you want to be like. And whether it's Terra Madre, whether it's Whole Foods, whether it's whatever Woolworths, you know, it's like, imagine it, you didn't have that. And it's essentially, that I feel is one of the healthiest ways, because you look at my grand folks, like they ate organic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. You know, and with this kind of syntropic understanding, we can create like highly productive small scale systems, you know, a couple of meters squared. I could, like, if I get a system set up well, I can probably eat off 2 to 3 meters squared of yard space on my own. I look at some people's backyards in the suburbs and I'm like, you could actually run an organic market stall out of this if you got it into production. Like, this is no joke how much space.
So the Syntropy, some of the setups on that, you could just type into Google, I imagine, how to set up my own.
Yeah, well, it's come out of Brazil and it's in the process of being translated into English. There's not a lot of English resources out there. I'm tapped into the people in Australia doing that, and they're like, he's working hard, you know, like, to try and get it as out here as much as he can.
Do you want to give a little shout out to them? And
so my friend's name is Tiago Barbosa. Yep. And he kind of teaches syntropic farming in Australia. He runs workshops and courses all the way up the North Coast, and I'll be bringing him to Sydney late this year, and hopefully a few times later. And like, I'm going to work on developing a suburban syntropic gardening course with him, because largely he's working at bigger scales, which is great, because like, getting contracts with the farmers and getting them to convert over to these systems is actually what we really need. But
it's perfect.
Yeah, but you know, like, for those of us in the small scale, we can get going. Yeah.
Well, nice. Maybe we can organize a chat with him on here as well.
Yeah, man, he'd be great to talk to. I can hook you up with him if you want. He's a lovely guy.
Awesome, brother. I got to get going as well. We both got to get going. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate all the work you're doing in the world. It's much necessary and needed, it feels like.
Yep. Thanks, man.
Nice to get to know you. And this is just the opening, the beginning of the discussion. I'm sure we'll carry on the conversation further down the track.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Awesome, brother. Is there any last little thoughts you'd like to leave the listeners with before we wrap up?
Yeah, one one little phrase I like to think of sometimes: evolve or die. That's kind of, I think, where we're at. Evolve or die. Evolution moves on. We're either aligned with it or we're not, you know, or we become an extinct species. We become a footnote.
Awesome. That sounds like where can I buy the t-shirt?
Yeah. I'm coming soon.
Awesome, brother. So thank you. Have a great one, and we'll tune in soon.
Thanks, man. You too.
Until next time, guys, keep it flowing and growing. Boom.